Welcome to Labor Lounge Podcast. I'm Anthony Abrantes, Assistant Executive Secretary Treasurer of the Eastern Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters, the Carpenters Union.
And I'm Cyndie Williams, Executive Director of the CCT. Together as your co-hosts, we'll explore the world of organized labor, bringing you behind-the-scenes stories and insights from inspiring union leaders, dedicated partners, and community change makers. In each episode, we dive into authentic conversation to uncover what unions are really about beyond the headlines and the myths.
Whether you're new to the movement or a union ally, our conversation showcasing diverse voices and real-life stories will explore union hurdles, triumphs, labor's rich history, its role in workforce development, all while shedding light on how unions create lasting change and foster economic growth and creating generational wealth.
Join us as we build a broader coalition, elevate future generations, and showcase how unions contribute to creating a positive cultural legacy.
Tune in, get informed, and find out how organized labor is making a difference. Today we are joined by Dr. Benjamin Dworkin, the founding director of the Rowan Institute in Public Policy and Citizenship at Rowan University in Glassboro, New Jersey. Since 2018, Dr. Dworkin has led the Institute in creating programs that connect Rowan students and faculty with public entities supporting career development, internships, applied public policy research. Under his leadership, the Institute brings speakers and events focused on civic engagement, political participation, and workforce-relevant public policy. A widely quoted political analyst in New Jersey and nationally, he appears on NPR and CNN and featured in outlets such as the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Dr. Dworkin has spent years in public service and strategic communication, helping organizations understand how policy, politics, and messaging intersect. Good morning, Dr. Dworkin. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me, Cyndie. Thanks so much for having me, Anthony.
Absolutely. It's great to see you. Let's get started. Let's kick right into it. I'm sure there's a lot to talk about. So you've built a unique career across politics, academia, communications, and public engagement. Can you share a little bit about the origins of the Rowan Institute of Public Policy and Citizenship and what you set out to achieve and why you founded it?
Well, first of all, growing up, I didn't even know this job existed. You know, it's not like you're 16 years old, like, I want to grow up and become the director of a public policy institute. Like, nobody thinks like that. But I had a rather eclectic career involving politics and campaigns and communications and private sector. I ran my own a couple businesses along the way. I taught and was involved in youth group work at certain points. And suddenly I ended up in a situation where all those skills in this very eclectic resume came together. I spent 10 years at Rider University doing similar work at a obviously much smaller school. And then exactly 8 years ago, I mean, we just celebrated our 8th anniversary of RIPPAC, the Rowan Institute for Public Policy and Citizenship at Rowan University, just this week. So 8 years ago, I started at Rowan, and it came about because they were interested. They had nothing like this, and they were interested in bringing me in to launch this kind of a program. And the premise here is that a functioning democracy, a representative democracy, requires an engaged and informed citizenship. It does not work if there's only an elite that make decisions. And that was what the founders of this country understood. The premise of RIPPAC, the Rowan Institute for Public Policy and Citizenship, is that a functioning democracy, a functioning representative democracy absolutely requires an informed and engaged citizenship. You cannot do this grand experiment, as Lincoln called it, without the citizens being involved. We cannot rely on just an elite that makes decisions and knows what's going on. Everybody has to. And this is one of the fundamental reasons why the Constitution says the people's house, the Congress, is the first section. It's Article 1 of the Constitution, because it's more important than the presidency. These are co-equal branches, but we're talking about the people first. It's we the people. And if the people don't know what's going on and they can't understand what's going on, then there's a problem. And the system doesn't work. So what happens is that right now, politics for too many people, not everybody, but for far too many people, is too confusing, too full of conflicts, too corrupt, too dysfunctional for them to even, too complicated for them to understand. And so they don't. They leave it, because the world goes on tomorrow and I didn't know what Congress did today, or my state legislature for that matter. So you've got this, we have this need, we're not achieving it. RIPPAC is the answer. RIPPAC is a way to inform, engage, and train Rowan students, Rowan faculty, and the general public in all aspects of applied politics and active citizenship. So that's what we were setting out to do and where it came from.
Well, the interesting thing about that is, and I'm glad you brought this up, we assume, and there's an assumption that the public understands how politics works or how policy is created, or even what the branches of government are, or what a legislator is or what a commissioner is. The reality is the majority of constituents do not understand that. And it makes you wonder, how do they go into the voter's box and decide who they're going to vote for if they don't understand governing or what a particular candidate stands for? And it's programs like this. It's a lot of the work we do, with our membership engagement and political, addressing political politics and dynamics, and how that works is you need an educated constituency on politics and policy to understand what they're really voting for and why they're voting for, and to make sure they're voting in their own interests. And the reality is the majority of folks don't. So you're really proactively getting ahead of this to making sure that people at a young age understand when you go into the workforce, when you're eligible to vote, when you can help control your destiny, that you're well informed on what that looks like. And that's important, regardless of what industry you're in.
I'm just thinking back to my own, being in my 20s, being in college, and the incredible influence that my college education had on where my future was going. I had already been in the workforce at that point, did a labor studies program, but the classes that I took and the amount of union history that I engaged in to create my passion and where I was going in my career was so critical at that moment. And politics and policy were all a part of that. And that learning and growing and how do I become an adult and how does this skin fit on me was so important at that time, because you didn't have a dime to rub together. You were trying to figure it all out, but you were trying to align yourself with what mattered to you. And, it's so very important. How do you connect to everyday citizens through Rowan Institute and just, outside of college students in connection to the general population, if you will? How are you reaching those folks as well?
Well, we do a number of different programs throughout the academic year. We provide opportunities, platforms for speakers to come in, elected officials. Now, we're located in southern New Jersey, and a lot of times people just forget about us. It's out of sight, out of mind. Even though we've got 24,000 students and we're heading towards 40,000. So this is a public university that is one of the primary economic engines in the entire southern region. Even with that, people don't get a chance. If you're living in North Jersey, there's a lot of different places. You can go hear a lot of different things. There's just not nearly as much. So our programming is the real way we reach out to the general public, so they can hear, so that they can see these elected officials are human. They're real. They're not. One of the biggest things you find is that students sometimes, they're excited to do a selfie with a member of Congress. Now, the three of us might be
Cory
like,
Booker, of course.
Not just him, but any of them. And, the three of us are like, yeah, all right, I've seen this guy a dozen times. Like, I know him, I've had him for lunch. But for them, these are celebrities. And we know they're not celebrities. They're elected officials. They have important positions and important roles. But when you break down, when you bring those kinds of people in, and they realize, they're flesh and blood. It's just normal folks, but they have certain roles in their jobs, and they're going to get to vote. So they should hear from students and from the general public what they think.
Yeah. What do you think some of the biggest misconceptions are in civic engagement? And there's a lot of them.
What do you mean? I just want to make sure I understand when you say misconceptions by...
I know a good example, like when I would think about it, people don't believe they can be as impactful as they are as an individual when engaging in politics or policy. So what do you think, other than that, are there other misconceptions out there on from the average day person, how they can be influential in governing.
Yeah, I mean, so yes, again, sort of one of the reasons we're here is because there is such cynicism, because you can't fight City Hall. It was a phrase in a previous generation, and now it's just, this is what's going to happen. Rich people are going to make certain decisions. People who are very close, and that involves, extends to issues of campaign finance and how we and what we allow the wealthier to be able to purchase in a competitive representative democracy. There are. So I think there's a misconception, not just on how politics works. People don't understand it, so there's ignorance on it. And then if they say, well, three guys sit in a room and that's, how it all, and we know, okay, it's not that doesn't happen sometimes, but more often, there are various forces competing. They are making arguments. They are trying to collect votes in order to get to a majority. They're making compromises, which are not a bad thing. I try to explain to my students, if your legislation is to create a horse and you end up with a camel, it's an ugly looking horse, but it still gets you from point A to point B. And so you sometimes need, because you wouldn't have anything, you'd all be walking from that point. So I think there are misconceptions about the ability to affect change driven by a lack of understanding about how it all works, which is one of the things we try to...
Not to mention people are being funneled as they read their phones into a certain news story that's going to keep them there.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's an evil that, is totally outside of all of this.
No, if we get a chance to sort of talk about the future and sort of like the meta trends here, I can elaborate on that even more.
Sure, yeah. So the Rowan Institute emphasizes preparing the next generation of leaders. What skills or habits do you believe are most essential for young people who want to meaningfully engage in public life today?
Yeah, single biggest skill is reading. And that will get to algorithms and our whole sort of, our lives have just been changed by social media and the internet in both positive and negative. But nobody reads to the second or third paragraph anymore. You see a headline. That's it. So it's a skill. You've got to read the entire memo, not just the 5 summary points at the beginning. Then there's writing. And every college professor, regardless, anybody who requires writing, will tell you the last 30 years have seen a tremendous drop-off in writing skill. Ivy League universities are requiring writing courses now, and you presume the kids who got there know how to write, but it's not well enough. You have to be able to make an argument. So there's the skill of both reading and writing, which seems ridiculously fundamental, but we have gotten away from it far too much. And the third one is just listening. The ability to focus and listen to your opponent, to your colleague, to somebody. We move so fast that we're ready with our next comment before we listen and appreciate what somebody else is. And I think the lack of listening is an important skill, because we see it in our elected officials when they don't do it well. When they don't listen, or they're listening to a small group of people as opposed to large other voices, they're missing the tides of the public that can really sway how decisions get made. Yeah.
And with that, there's been a lot of mistrust in government, probably for the last couple decades. What do you see out there that's a promising strategy to hopefully bring confidence back to government from the day-to-day person who's maybe apolitical?
Well, I think there's 2 things we probably need to improve transparency. To improve trust. So the first is transparency. But sometimes we talk about transparency and we limit it to the governmental process. Right? It should be open up. We don't want decisions. You're not allowed to have a smoke-filled room anymore in most buildings, but it's still the small room where a couple people are making decisions. You want openness. You want effectiveness. You don't need chaos. But you want people to understand legislation shouldn't be done in the last 5 minutes when nobody
Yep.
is watching. But transparency doesn't just extend there. We've had open government periods in the 70s, sunshine laws and
Yep.
things like that. What we also talk about transparency, we're talking about the ability to cover it, to report on it. And what we've seen, when I started in politics, you went to the State House in Trenton, and there was an entire hallway filled with members of the media,
Yep.
the press. It was called Press Row. The Star Ledger, a blessed memory. The Star Ledger had 7, 8 people working there. New York Times had 2 or 3 people covering what was happening in Trenton. We do not have that today. And it is very unfortunate. But so transparency, if you do something in public, but nobody knows about it, it's effectively transparent to the person,
Yep.
to the citizen. So transparency has to extend. The other thing that I think we need in order to build trust is just respect. And there's 2 parts to this. It's respect by an elected official for the public. Tell me what you think. Yes, I know more about issue XYZ than you do, and so you might be ill-informed. But that's my job to now inform you,
Yeah.
right? But I got to listen to you because this is your life. This is what you are dealing with. So it's respect that, but it's also respect for the public to the elected official. It stinks to be an elected official. Like we look again.
It's only at the top, right?
It seems great. Like someone does your laundry and someone picks drives you everywhere. These are all wonderful things. But to be a school board member is tough. And we need good school board members. And to be a member
Those
of the
folks are
council.
volunteers, right?
Yeah, well, basically, right? And to be in the council, in a town council, municipal council, you can't go shopping anymore because people are stopping. There's a lot of intrusions. Now, you offset it, but we should respect that this is a tough job for them too. And so just yelling at them all the time doesn't necessarily help, because then they don't want to share with you. Then they don't want to talk with you. We have to have respect just going both ways. I think those 2 things, transparency and respect, are the ways to really build trust. And everybody can do that. You don't have to be anybody particular. You don't need a new law.
So Ben, can you tell us about a public policy issue that you can remember that involves civic engagement and a measurable outcome that happened in the community?
It's a good question. So much of public policy making is inside baseball. But yeah, I'll give you 2. One is marriage equality. I try to convey, my students don't appreciate it. They've all been born in the 21st century, right? They do not appreciate that you could have George W., President Bush, run a national campaign where opposition to marriage equality was central to driving out the vote. They wanted to put it on key states and, as referenda and key states. It was all there, and how much it is how much has changed. And so when you try to explain the civil rights movement or the women's movement or any other kind of social movement that dramatically changed America, you can say, this changed in your lifetime. That is, and that would not have happened. This, the state legislature voted against it, could not get the votes for marriage equality, and had to wait 2 years, and then did. And then you had, the history was involving Chris Christie, who was running for president at the time. He was going to try and veto it in some ways. And then the Supreme Court ruled in Obergefell, forget it. We're deciding for the country. But that would not have happened had you not had civic engagement by countless citizens, by people who knew somebody who was gay or lesbian, by gays and lesbians who organized themselves, by just a full thing. This was civic engagement. So I think that is one example. The other, perhaps more relevant to a labor union, was minimum wage. The drive for 15 brought the issue to the front. It just did. It was not there. Everybody, look, we're never so good that employers want to raise a minimum wage. And that drive, made it. It became popular enough with enough people, not just a handful of folks who were already in that camp, but it convinced others that we can expand the economy because you had to make the intellectual argument, but you had to expand the economy by expanding the purchasing power of working class people, and this will make a difference. And those who were paying minimum wage, the restaurant owners and others who struggled with it, they were engaged too, which is why we have tiers, which is why these were the compromises that needed to be made. But again, that issue I don't think would have even reached the level of let's do this in the state legislature with the governor had there not been active, robust civic engagement beyond just the key stakeholders.
Other than people not being informed, right, which is an assumption, that we assume that people understand politics, we have to account for polarization. And there's different variations of polarization. But at the end of the day, all of them cause disengagement and disenfranchisement. With that said, groups like RIPPAC, other institutions that kind of serve the same purpose, how can they effectively get people that maybe feel like they're disengaged or their interests aren't being represented to come together, listen to other folks, but still effectively advocate for themselves and what their values are? Because people tend to give up if they're facing opposition.
There's more to answer that sort of why people give up. We can talk about it maybe a little later. But I'm going to give you an answer to this question about what RIPPAC does, what I think people can do to offset the drive towards all of the incentives towards polarization. And that's why, first day of class, every class I teach, is why do people do politics? And kids come up with different reasons, right? Why do they engage in campaigns? Why do they do politics? Well, because you want to get some particular issue passed. You want to stop an issue you don't like because you want a job, because it's money, because any number of reasons. The number one reason why anybody gets involved with this stuff is because it's fun. It is fun. And you have to remind people that it's fun, because sometimes they get so wrapped up in it that they forget that oh my gosh, this is competition. It's sports for all of us who are too short, too slow, too fat, too blind to do any other sport. Because we got a Super Bowl every November in Jersey. This is great. And you hang out with people who think like you. And you pick a side. And so suddenly I met my wife through politics. I mean, this is how, oh my gosh, it was a whole lot better than going to a singles bar. So it's fun. You talk to people who were involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement, the most exciting times of their lives was when they were marching. That was when they enjoyed and felt alive more than anything. So how do we do it? We try and make things fun. We'll go to a baseball game. And this is all my kids, meaning our students who are involved with us, who, again, multidisciplinary. It's not just political science students, history students. I got finance majors, people who just want to make sure. But you bring them all together, and they'll enjoy each other's company. Therefore, flash forward, I'll give you just a quick example. Got a couple former students who are now working for various state legislatures. One of them ended up working for a Republican in the Jersey Shore area. And the chief of staff dumped a file on this thing. I've been trying to, will you figure out how to get us on as a co-sponsor of this bill? This is a Democratic bill. We're Republican. They're not calling me back. So frustrated. My former student looks at it and says, oh, I know somebody who works in that office. Calls up his friend, who he knows from Rowan University, and says, hey, can my boss get on your boss's thing? Done. Goes back. Guy's got a job, right? The chief of staff loves him. Now, it's simple, the simple interactions of what it was. So if you remind people that we can all smile, we can all have a good time, you remind them. The people who have been in politics, both in D.C. and in Trenton, for decades will tell you, I miss the days when we all went out for a drink afterwards, or we all went out for dinner after the session. Now, that has happened for a number of reasons, but those are the things, that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it just enjoyable. The other thing, I think that RIPPAC teaches, because your question was, how does RIPPAC contribute to offsetting the polarization, is really, again, just about respect. No, we don't do that here. Okay, this is everything. You want to be a hardcore partisan, then join the college, Republicans, college Democrats, which many kids do anyway, but exclusively that. Then you won't have to deal with anybody who disagrees with you. RIPPAC isn't that. It's nonpartisan, it's multidisciplinary, so it's people from a lot of different backgrounds come together. And so when we get into discussions, we'll have a speaker who has a particular point of view. You learn it. You deal with it, and we do it respectfully. So those are the ways we kind of handle it.
To your point, because to me, it is a game, it is competition. That's what keeps me in it. That's what keeps me engaged. And I'm fortunate to work with both sides of the aisle. And you mentioned that, and there was a time where, especially down in D.C., where they would, argue on the floor, and next thing you know, they're at Capitol Grill, they're at a restaurant coming together, right? It's like after the game, you had winners and losers, but we still come together. That culture back then, I think, was a culture that was reflected in society as well. Like, you could be a Democrat, you could be a Republican, you could be an independent, but you could talk politics, you still come together at the table. I feel like we've lost that at that level, and that culture has translated down into people that aren't necessarily political, and they feel like they have to take sides, and you can't sit down with opposition and talk about what their views are compared to your views and come up with compromise. New Jersey's not as divisive relative to other states, but I think there's responsibility in government and our elected leaders to say, hey, we might look like we don't like each other when we're negotiating a bill or we're discussing policy, but at the end of the day, we do shake hands and we talk to each other and we do, come up with compromise, because I don't think the average American knows that.
I think, and that's one of the key things that will often come when we bring in a guest speaker. Sometimes it's more of a brown bag lunch, kind of just about 20 kids around a table. Sometimes it's a more prominent elected official comes in and will speak to a larger crowd. We open it up to the public. But when they share it, when they say, yes, I don't hate these people, I vehemently disagree. I think they are just misguided and But could I still break bread with this person? Yes. And so until that gets revealed, you don't. Look, I think there's historical, understanding some history or looking back at American history, I think gives us some perspective on this. As modern media came around and you had the mass publication press, really, Andrew Jackson and, 1800s, those early 1800s, it was a very partisan press. This is why you have the Des Moines Republican kind of thing, right? That's where the St. Louis Democrat, these are the names of old papers, and they were partisan. The headlines would read, "Our boys take Albany." That kind of a thing. And starting in the progressive era, which not only opened the door for unions and other kinds of things, but just ending child labor and other kinds of things, also included a movement towards a public interest media, public interest press, where the goal was to try and get the best, as you understand it, not in a partisan way. Obviously, there are going to be editorial boards, opinion writers in the back of the paper, they have their opinions. But just in terms of the headlines and in terms of this, they're going to do their best. What Roger Ailes figured out and made billions for the Murdochs and Fox News was you could go back and make more money if you went back to the partisan press. And people have responded, both because there's an economic incentive to do so. So even as you had a changing media landscape, meaning we have fewer papers that are going out there, you had the economic incentives were driven towards the polarization, driven towards the division. And so the average person who likes to think, I'm informed, either thinks, depending on their algorithm that they're looking at online or the paper they read, everybody thinks like me. And therefore, I don't understand these people who must be crazy because everybody on my feed tells me I'm right. And I agree with all this stuff. Sure. Because that's where the money is.
Sure. And we've all seen the volatility of these sensational media.
Exactly. And so you have a situation where when we bring in a public official who says, yes, that's the media and that's what I do on, hardball or whatever it is.
Theater.
In a given thing, where we duke it out. But the fact is we're friends.
Yeah.
The fact is we can still talk to each other, even if we're on other sides. What is unfortunate, I think, is that some people say, I can't believe you talked to him. I don't trust you anymore.
Right. Yeah.
I can't believe you compromised. And that really, I look back and, Steve Kornacki wrote a book, The Red and the Blue, about the rise of polarization. He starts it with Gingrich and the Republican Revolution in '94. You find these percolating ideas where compromise, negotiation, accommodation, which we got 350 million people living in this country. We don't all agree. So those were necessary. But now they became seen as the very reasons why the country went off the rails in the first place. Because you compromised, because you accommodated, because you negotiated. So we don't want any of that, which means nothing gets done, which means no. So all of this, again, how do we handle such big societal misunderstandings? That's where RIPPAC comes in. Yeah. I mean, this is where we have to
I was just going to say, going back to educating your student body and showing them how policy is made, and also helping them to understand this monster that's out there in media. Are you bringing that conversation with policymakers and folks from the community to come in and speak to these students to give them the reality of what they're being exposed to, and how to educatively make a decision as to how to tune into your phone and how not to tune into your phone?
It's hard. I mean, it's very difficult to tell them, spend less time on your phone. I mean,
but in a palatable way, they are really going to help us change that future, change that tide. Giving them those algorithm stories. I mean, I know there's documentaries about it, but really just pounding in the idea that we are not robots. We are not all moving in the direction that someone's telling us to move in.
And that's, I think, when you, again, these people aren't on pedestals. Once you see that they're like a normal person, right? Andy Kim is a normal person. Cory Booker, as gifted as his talents are, right, and has had this rock star status since he was a kid, he's still a normal person, right? And he's going to get married, and he's going to, he is a normal person. And when you get them to, I mean, sometimes politicians, not necessarily the two I just mentioned, but just politicians in general, they're so performative.
Yeah. So Ben, just for our sake, since we live and breathe organized labor and the labor movement, how influential in your professional experience do you think labor unions are in actually effectuating good public policy?
Good public policy from a labor union perspective is part and parcel of the degree you have an influence on the people who are writing laws. So leaving aside, hey, we're going to try and get members of our union to actually run for office, you're trying to influence those from the outside. In a political world where money matters, the fact that labor unions are able to raise and spend money means they're always going to have an influence. And that could be direct contributions, it could be independent expenditures in a campaign. Clearly, in terms of membership, you've got voters and volunteers to offer. That provides an influence. Then there are a lot of folks, a labor union member, Congressman, Norcross, who's an electrician, will say, nobody knows how to fix a light bulb. And I work with some of the smartest people in the country. So they just don't know. Part of the influence that a labor union has is just informing how a job site really operates, because they have no clue. They've done whatever they've done in their career. And so you have to inform them of, these are the issues. Here's how people are getting picked for jobs. Here's where the system breaks down. And finally, I think, labor unions can and do, when done effectively, when led effectively, on just educating the public.
Yeah.
Public.
That's why we're here.
Right. And so, but it's also just, here are the challenges. Here's, these are people in your neighborhood. These, carpenters and other trained and skilled craftspeople. And here are the challenges that they're facing. This is what it is, because the average guy who's pumping my gas has no clue how this. And so he's not going to get involved or talk about it at his dinner table about what you're doing. So all of those are, I think, ways. There's always an influence by labor unions, but do those other kinds of things effectively, and you can make that even bigger.
Yeah. And I think if we go back for enough legacy labor members, it was a cultural thing that actually went from one generation to another. We've lost that. Obviously, there was a correlation with the labor movement and the loss of generational wealth on politics. And that's unfortunate, right? Because it was part of basically a family's, legacy on, hey, whether I was a white collar worker or a blue collar worker, I understood because my mother, my father, my grandmother, my grandfather were part of a movement that was political.
Right.
And we lost that. So it's groups like RIPPAC that can actually, help bring that back. So just talking about that, and looking towards the future, what trends do you see related to public policy and civic engagement? And what can we prepare for in terms of challenges to make sure people are ready for that?
I've come to the conclusion that the biggest fundamental change in our lifetimes has been the internet. Now, that's not particularly insightful, but the internet, which has done a great number of positive things in our world, has undermined our democracy and undermined our body politics. Everything with the internet, when we think about it, it goes faster and it's more customized, right? Which has become part of it. We are used to everything going, it's instant this, 24-hour that, delivery, right? Went from 2 day to 1 day to same day, same hour. We're gonna get this stuff delivered to you. We watch the news, and we have 24/7 news channels, and you're watching the news, and they will still put a scroll at the bottom of the screen telling you something that's even more newsworthy and more happening than a person who's literally reading the news at the same time. So things go faster, and as we've mentioned a few times in this podcast, algorithms and things are all customized, which means I can bundle your auto insurance and only pay for what you need, whether it is, and that line goes for both your cable bill and your insurance and the news you read, which reinforces these silos. People say, this is great, it's personalization, and that may well have something, but it ruins and undermines politics because things go so fast. We read summaries of synopses of headlines. Nobody gets a thing, right? I'm sure we all do. We get these collections like my morning briefing of whatever it is, and I'm only looking at the top news. Nobody's reading the third paragraph. I said that about my students, but I think it affects society at large. This gives us an electorate that is impatient. It gives us an electorate that is unforgiving because you have to have done it. I don't understand why. Everything else is moving fast. Politics doesn't move fast. Politics is a process, and that's the only way you get 330 million people to create a policy that they will buy into. It's less humble because politics because we think everybody's supposed to think like us. So there's no empathy for the other side, because I never hear about the other side, and it's demanding, extremely demanding. Move it now. This opens the door. This kind of electorate, which is a byproduct of this kind of technological change, this kind of electorate then is ready to hear any politician who say, I've got a quick answer, and I know who to blame, and I know where to go. That's it. You don't have to think about it. Just follow me. That is a road towards really tough times for the America that most of us grew up in. And I think the people who have achieved great success in their careers, sports, you talk to the greatest hitters of all, Ted Williams, you see the ball coming in slow. everything gets slowed down. The quarterbacks,
Yeah.
when they get to be, the top level quarterbacks, we're all watching the NFL playoffs now. The top level quarterbacks, when did they go from being a rookie trying to figure it out to being a really good quarterback? When the play went in slow motion in their head, even
Right.
though it's moving with these professional athletes incredibly fast.
Yep.
But they see it. You talk to film editors, right? They will take old crank reels to go for the frame, and that's when they win the Oscar. When you slow it down. I think this is the challenge in the future. We move so fast and expect such customization that we don't appreciate that politics moves slow. The way birth moves slow. You can't rush. A couple trying to get pregnant, it takes time. Sometimes it's not as easy as they told you in health class, as any number of couples will know. It takes time, and then you've got to go through it. Mourning, for those of us who have lost a parent or another loved one, you don't get over it in a day, but everything else gets done in a day or less. It takes time. And I think when if the society can come to in a reaction against the speed and customization that has enveloped us, we can find a way to solve the problems facing this country.
Along with listening and finding compassion, right?
Yeah, I mean, all of these are skills, but listening means taking time to listen. So you got to slow down and listen to what somebody is saying. When labor unions have faced any number of challenges in recent years. One of them, particularly at the national level, was sometimes often, not all of them, all unions obviously, but there's a disconnect between where the leadership is thinking and where their grassroots are thinking. So the endorsements don't mean the same because they're not. That's a lot of listening that has to go on both sides of those groups in order to find a way. And that allows us, and this will be the thing that I would end on, that allows us to be the kinds of citizens we want to be. Because you can't do it fast. My father passed away 20 years ago, blessed memory. My father used to tell me, this was one of his bigger lessons, that Ben, in the history of the world, no one ever washed a rented car. Now I was like 8, so I didn't know what a rented car was. I didn't quite absorb the message there. But I have come to remember that particular lesson from my father. No one ever washes a rented car because democracy can't be rented. You have to take ownership. The first time any little kid knows how to take care of something and not leave it out, some toy, they didn't leave out in the yard, it was the moment they paid for it.
Yep.
The moment you buy that sweater or something at the mall, that was a moment you're like, I'm taking care of this because I have ownership of it. And I think we have to take ownership of our democracy. And that is how we find. And to do that requires time. It requires effort. It requires organization. These are things that unions do. They organize, they put the time in, and everybody needs to do it for themselves. Because, once you take ownership of it, I think we'll be able to find some solutions.
Well, the work you're doing at RIPPAC, I think, is really helping address what we were just discussing. And I think it's extremely important to not only the country as a whole, but individuals that are going to be the future leaders taking us into another direction. So I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for the great work you're doing. I want to thank you for your leadership and your insight.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah, this has been incredibly enlightening today. So we appreciate you coming on.
Anytime, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.